Was that a whistle I heard? I never learned to whistle like that. Good morning, church. It might seem a little strange for a male such as I am to so frequently return to this subject of reproductive justice. Well, some of you may know or recall that I did serve on the board of directors of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. And in my advocacy across the decades, have had opportunity to speak and to write about this issue. And one of the most humbling moments in my professional career was when I authored an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times speaking about women's rights, not on this particular aspect. And they published the article by Madison, and I got back a number of letters to the editor when they used to do those things that all addressed me as Ms. Shockley. I felt so proud that they thought I was a woman. Of course, Madison used to be a rare and precious name. And then it got ruined by that movie Splash and that doggone mermaid. But it is a cause to which I feel deeply called. That's why I encouraged us to join the book club most recently concluded, where we read Rebecca Todd Peters' book, Trust Women. Now, we originally read it some 5 or 6 years ago, but now it just seems that every other phrase I hear in the media is about trusting women. And of course, this book was written before the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision. So I just feel it's still appropriate, yet again, to address the question of faith and reproductive freedom. Galatians 5:1 says very simply, "For freedom Christ has set us free." For freedom Christ has set us free. And just a couple of the verses for emphasis. You are called to freedom, brothers and sisters, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I want to invite you to a thought experiment, if you will. Let us put ourselves in another's place in time, another's gender, another's social status, and try to experience these words as they were first experienced. Let us remember the time and place and the persons who first heard these words. So I invite you, imagine you are in the Eastern Roman Empire during the very first century of this common era. And you're sitting in a house where you are an enslaved person, but you're participating in a worship service organized by the householder, by your enslaver. And everyone gathers for this worship in the house church, and a letter of Paul has arrived. And as part of their worship service, they read these words from the apostle who had founded their Christian community. You're enslaved in that household, but yet invited to the worship, in fact, invited to be a Christian. And a letter from Paul arrives, and you hear these words: "For freedom, Christ has set us free." Now, imagine you are a woman attending that same house church meeting, and you hear the words, "For freedom, Christ has set us free." Now let's move forward in time to the antebellum South. And imagine you are an enslaved black woman having birthed 7 children by 3 different enslaved men, and some by the enslaver himself. You are sitting in the Sunday morning worship service on the plantation, which you are required to attend by your enslaver, and you hear these words from the letter of Paul to the Galatians: "For freedom, Christ has set us free." I'm sorry, scratch that. You would never hear that passage read at the plantation-sponsored worship service. But you might hear these words down by the riverside, where the enslaved folks would gather on Wednesday evening after the enslavers had turned in for the night, and they would steal away and have their own worship service. And there, maybe on Wednesday night, 15 or so enslaved persons would take the risk of faith to gather and to worship together and attend that prayer service. And there they heard the words, "For freedom, Christ has set us free." Now, maybe 15 enslaved persons attended that service, but only 10 returned to the cabins, while 5 take those words to heart and set off along the Underground Railroad seeking that very freedom. Now move forward a little further and imagine that you are a 19-year-old woman in Romania in 1980, where abortion is illegal, and where during the last 2 decades, over 10,000 women have died seeking a secret abortion. Not to mention the tens of thousands who were injured and maimed and damaged, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. Imagine you're that young woman in 1980 Romania, and you open your Bible and you read the words, "For freedom, Christ has set us free." Now, move into our current moment. And imagine that you are an American woman who once had the right to determine for yourself whether, when, and how many children to have. But now you live in Texas. You didn't change, but the law changed. And you live in a state that looks more like Romania in the 1980s than the America you knew just 3 short years ago. Now, you are a faithful Christian, and you went to your local megachurch, and they did read this passage from Galatians, "For freedom Christ has set you free," but the preacher tells you it only means that you are free from sin. but you are pregnant and do not want to be. And when you leave church that morning, you start to drive west to New Mexico, where you can get the health care you need. But along the way, as you approach the border between New Mexico and Texas, some small podunk town has passed a local ordinance that empowers their two-person police department to stop any cars that they fear might be carrying a pregnant woman to another state for the purpose of seeking an abortion. Rebecca Todd Peters' groundbreaking book, Trust Women, a progressive Christian argument for reproductive justice, seeks to set us free from what she calls the justification framework of reproductive theology, morality, and law, and usher us into the justice framework, not the justification framework, but the justice framework of theology, morality, and law. In the section of her book entitled From Justification to Justice, she reminds us, quote, current estimates indicate that the average woman in the U.S. spends less than 3 years pregnant, postpartum, or trying to become pregnant, and 30 years trying to avoid pregnancy. She argues that the justification framework presumes every pregnancy is a moral good, and one must justify overcoming that presumption in order to seek abortion care from your doctor. This justification framework actually encompasses the so-called pro-choice movement. And you'll notice a little change in our vernacular, vocabulary, and nomenclature. Pro-choice is no longer the term of art of the moment. The term of art of the moment is reproductive justice, because pro-choice was much too narrow. It failed to recognize that even if the law allowed it, there are women who are too poor, women who are not free enough to exercise their choice. And so a new movement emerged and reframed the whole conversation into reproductive justice, a broader concept than just this one medical procedure. If we confine our conversation to this one medical procedure, we've lost the battle. The justification framework has dominated our society for the last 30, 40 years. And even the pro-choice movement has struggled to carve out a little space within that justification framework. The justification framework presumes typically 4 justifications that are automatically understood by most. These 4 are known by the acronym PRIM, PRIM. It stands for prenatal health, P, rape, R, incest, I, and life of the mother, M. And these are accepted as justifiable reasons for abortion. Since 1972, some 87% of the U.S. public has consistently approved of abortion when a woman's health is endangered. 78% approved of it in circumstances of rape. 77% in cases of serious prenatal issues as well. However, only 1% of abortions are a result of rape. Less than 0.5% are the result of incest. About 12% of abortions are sought to protect a woman's health, and 13% for prenatal health issues. You add it all together, and almost 3/4 of the women seeking abortions in the United States do so for reasons other than the conventionally justifiable reasons. Todd Peters offers that a reproductive justice framework changes the starting point for the theological, moral, and legal conversation that we're having in this country. All evidence in the current context points to this reality. Abortion politics are not about abortion, not about the status of the prenatal life, not about the woman's health. They are about the social control of women. That's what it's about. She offers that the moral starting point for a theology of reproductive justice has to be the actual life of the woman and potential mother, not the life of the embryo and its potential for life. Reproductive justice is based on a foundation of comprehensive sexuality education. See, our current patchwork of sexuality education, which is generally less comprehensive than what I received in the 8th grade in the 1960s. But this lack of education seems to be a pro-natalist plot to keep our children ignorant. And the strategy seems that ignorance will breed, well, breeders. Ignorance will breed. Their strategy has delivered us a country here in the 21st century that has a 50% unplanned pregnancy rate. That's all pregnancies, within and without marriages, teenagers and adults, all together 50%. So, teaching children, teens, and young adults about the sacred value of our sexuality, respect for their bodies, and how to make good decisions about when and with whom to share the most precious gift of sexual intimacy is a far more responsible approach than ignorance. Our current state of affairs sets us up for a pandemic of unintended and unwanted pregnancies that result too often in unwanted children. Just ask the Romanians what happened to the children that women and girls were forced to bear. Reverend Mary Ferris can tell us about that.
Can I say that I spent 10 years in Romania working in orphanages, and the first question everybody always asks, why are there so many abandoned babies? It's because all birth control was forbidden. They tested every woman every month, their urine. No matter where you were, you got tested. If you were pregnant, then they followed you. And then you can force a woman to have a baby. You can't force them to keep it. So they abandon the baby. And then you have all these orphanages. And the social consequences of our country is coming right down. Now think, what are they prepared to take these babies to take care of them? No. What are they going to do? So it's a long story you want to ask.
Yeah. But also, I'll just add to what you've told me before, that the preponderance, well, because of patriarchy, mostly girl babies were abandoned, and those abandoned girl babies were often graduated from the orphanage into the sex trafficking industry. So you know what it sounds like, though, Mary? It sounds like they had Project 2025 before it was 2025. So consider that 40% of unplanned pregnancies end in abortion. And if you do the math, it means that roughly 1/3, 1 out of 3 U.S. women will have an abortion by age 45. That's 1 in 3 in Texas. That's 1 in 3 in Massachusetts. That's 1 in 3 in California. That's 1 in 3 in New York City. That's 1 in 3 in Carlsbad. 1 in 3. Whether planned, unplanned, chosen, avoided, or unattainable, pregnancies are part of the stories of women's lives. Yet considering the fact and the reality that 1 in 3 women have abortions, we can see that abortion is also a normal part of women's reproductive lives. It is the rule, not the exception. So, if we teach or assume or comply with this justification framework, that means that we are comfortable with the idea that 1 in 3 women cannot be trusted to make responsible, moral, and theologically sound decisions about their lives. This cannot hold. Reproductive justice is rooted in one simple moral and theological maxim: trust women. Trust women and potentially pregnant people to be able to make moral and theologically sound and socially responsible decisions. Trust women to understand that they were called to freedom and that they can be trusted to use that freedom responsibly. What did Paul's letter say? For freedom Christ has set us free, but that freedom is not an opportunity for self-indulgence. Reproductive justice suggests we can trust women to recognize that it is not self-indulgent to care for the children you already have. It is not self-indulgent to care, to continue to care, and to provide for your immediate and extended family. It is not self-indulgent to determine for yourself whether you are ready or desire to become pregnant. It is not self-indulgent to determine when you want to get pregnant and to bring that pregnancy to term. And it is not self-indulgent to decide for yourself how many times you are willing to risk your life, to risk your mental and physical health, to make the enormously selfless act of becoming a mother. Becoming a mother to a child for which you will be responsible for the next 18 years. 22 years. 25 years of their lives. And this passage from Galatians reminds us that the whole law is summed up in one single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Loving yourself is not self-indulgence. Amen? Amen? Loving yourself is not self-indulgence. It is the foundation from which you know what it means to love another. It is the foundation that allows you to love another without controlling their lives. To love another, trusting them as competent moral agents. To love another who has the freedom to live lives of creativity, compassion, and responsibility. These are the correct moral questions to ask. Healthcare interventions then become neutral moral decisions and are returned to the instrumental function that is the proper place of all healthcare. There are no laws regulating whether men can get vasectomies. There are no laws regulating any aspect of health care for men. It is only this area which is the key to controlling women's lives if you control their reproductive lives that has become the subject of political and legal action. The only question we should be asking when it comes to a woman's health care, or that she should be asking, or they should be asking, is how does this medical intervention help me live a long, healthy, and happy life? That's the moral question. Finally, we find ourselves in this moment in this very strange land before time. Land before Roe v. Wade, that is. And we are disoriented and confused. But I would remind us again of what Paul told the Galatians 2,000 years ago. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. In other words, we're not going back.